that I wanted to kill my mother. When I was 10, my mother killed my father.
19-year-old woman and her 21-year-old boyfriend have been arrested after police discovered the body of the woman's mother stuffed inside a suitcase on the resort island of Bali.
Heather Mack faced life in prison. 28 years is the max she'll serve, according to this plea deal. The judge now needs to decide if he accepts those terms.
We're starting today's case in Bali, a place most people immediately associate with peace, balance, and this idea of escaping reality. It's a picture everyone recognizes instantly. Warm, slow evenings where the air feels heavy with humidity. Bright white sandy beaches stretching softly into clear, shimmering ocean water. 5-star resorts where every tiny detail is designed for comfort and total ease. Everything here feels soaked in hospitality, beauty, and the promise of inner calm. For years, Bali has been sold as a kind of refuge, a place people go to heal, to reconnect with themselves, to pause, and finally leave their problems somewhere far away, beyond the horizon. At least that's how it looks in photos, glossy brochures, and in the imagination of those who don't yet know how a trip like this can actually end. So, real quick, where are you watching this video from? And what time is it for you right now? I'm genuinely curious to know where my audience is, and while you're typing that, I'll keep going. Because beneath this flawless, almost postcard-perfect image, there's a simple and uncomfortable truth hiding in plain sight. No palm trees, no endless ocean views, no luxury facades can erase the conflicts people bring with them. Geography doesn't heal cracks in relationships. And distance, no matter how far it feels, can't protect you from the people who are closest to you, emotionally, personally, and sometimes fatally. Right in the heart of one of Bali's most exclusive resorts, a family trip that was supposed to be an escape from everyday life, a chance to reconnect and be close, turned into a crime so disturbing, so deeply unsettling, that its echo didn't fade even after the first arrests. And this story didn't end on a tropical island, not even close. It followed everyone involved across oceans, countries, and entire continents, moving through cold courthouse hallways, endless hearings, and nearly a decade of exhausting legal battles that just seemed to drag on and on. A taxi driver was waiting outside the St. Regis Bali resort, watching the evening slowly settle over the grounds of this ultra-luxurious property. A young couple had placed a suitcase in the trunk of his car and walked back inside, promising they'd be out shortly. So he stayed behind the wheel, just sitting there, counting the minutes. But time kept passing. 15 minutes. 30, an hour. The couple never came back. He started to get anxious. Every extra minute meant lost money, missed fares, a ruined evening schedule. Finally, irritated and tired of waiting, he stepped out of the car and walked to the trunk. His movements were sharp. He just wanted to grab his things and move on. But the moment he opened it, the man froze. From beneath the edges of the suitcase, a dark, thick liquid was slowly seeping out. It was blood. The driver flinched, instinctively stepping back and turning away. The realization hit instantly, cold and heavy. He didn't try to investigate on his own. Without closing the suitcase, he got back into the car and drove straight to the nearest police station, where he simply left it behind, saying very little. When law enforcement opened the suitcase, they found the body of a woman believed to be around 50 or 60 years old. Her body had been brutally beaten. Investigators immediately noted multiple blows to the head, inflicted with a blunt object. Her light-colored hair was matted with blood, her face severely disfigured. On her arms there were bruises, deep hematomas, and clear defensive wounds. Several fingers were broken, as if she had been trying until the very last moment to shield herself from the blows. However, the autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. The blows themselves were not the direct cause of death. The critical injuries were to her face, which led to her airways being blocked. The woman suffocated. The death was slow and painful. Thanks to luggage tags and quick coordination with local hotel staff, police were able to identify the victim fairly quickly. The trail led investigators right back to the St. Regis Bali resort. That was where Sheila von Wiese-Mack had been staying with her teenage daughter, Heather. They had arrived in Bali on August 2nd and checked into the resort on August 9th. The suitcase was discovered just 3 days after they had settled in. The front desk reported that Heather had suddenly checked out of the hotel. She gave no explanation and never reported her mother missing. To the staff, it felt strange, but not alarming enough to raise immediate red flags. Resort employees also recalled that Sheila and Heather had been arguing frequently since their arrival. The arguments were loud, emotional, and often very public in restaurants, by the pool, and throughout the property. The tension between them was intense, almost hostile. Police reviewed room reservations and passport records. At first glance, it seemed unlikely that Heather could have gone to the airport. According to staff, Sheila kept her daughter's passport locked in a safe for security reasons. That detail only deepened concern. Finding the girl became urgent. Sheila von Wiese-Mack was a wealthy and well-known socialite from Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago. A close friend of hers, Elliot, remembered that Sheila loved old wine, old books, and longtime friends. She had a way of creating a special atmosphere around her, warm, welcoming, almost family-like. She traveled often, enjoyed hosting guests, and always made time for the people she cared about. According to Elliot, Sheila's purpose in life was bringing people together, gathering them in one place, and giving them a sense of home, wherever she happened to be. Her own home was always open, and everyone felt welcome there. Sheila was married to renowned jazz and classical composer James Mack. Over the course of his career, he worked on more than 60 jazz albums and remained highly respected in the music world. Together, they lived an elegant, affluent life, moved among elite circles, and regularly attended social events, receptions, and cultural gatherings. When their only child, Heather, was born, it seemed like their lives were finally complete, like every piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, at least on the surface. Sheila's sister, Debbie, later said,
"Of course they adored her, the first and only child my sister ever had. She felt incredibly blessed, genuinely happy. It was truly a beautiful family." The walls were covered in photos of Heather everywhere. Like everywhere. She was absolutely the center of their world, the light of their eyes.
According to Heather herself, she had always been a daddy's girl, and there was a special, emotionally close bond between her and James. She said more than once that with her father she felt understood and accepted. They shared a deep love for the arts. Heather became interested in music, theater, and ballet at an early age, and James eagerly supported those passions. He took her to performances and concerts, encouraged her creativity, and genuinely showed up for her. To Heather, he wasn't just a father, he was an ally. But that balance collapsed in 2006. During a cruise, James suddenly became seriously ill and urgently needed treatment for a severe infection that spread to his spinal cord. The consequences were devastating and permanent. From that moment on, he was confined to a wheelchair. Family life changed overnight, and everyday reality became filled with hospitals, procedures, and constant anxiety. A few years later, things grew even darker. At 76 years old, James was diagnosed with colon cancer. Exhausted and worn down, the family traveled to Greece, hoping to escape the cycle, if only briefly, and finally catch their breath. That's where everything took its final tragic turn. While Sheila stepped out of the hotel room for a short time, James was left alone with Heather. In that moment, he suddenly stopped breathing. Doctors later confirmed that a blood clot had formed in his lungs, and death came almost instantly. There was no chance to save him. What remained were 10-year-old Heather and Sheila alone together, in the immediate aftermath of unimaginable loss. And while grief can take many forms, Heather's behavior quickly became something Sheila simply couldn't manage. The girl was consumed by anger and pain that only grew stronger with time. Heather openly blamed Sheila for her father's death, insisting that the trip had been her mother's idea and that her dad hadn't even wanted to go. That guilt hung over their relationship constantly, like a shadow that never lifted. When Heather entered middle school, her behavior became even more defiant. The relationship between mother and daughter lived in a near constant state of tension, often erupting into open conflict. No matter what approach Sheila tried, calm conversations, restrictions, compromises, nothing worked. Heather kept pulling away. She rejected all authority and reacted violently to any attempt to set boundaries. Over time, she began skipping school, stealing Sheila's car, taking her money, and spending more time with older, increasingly dangerous crowds. She dropped out of school, became pregnant at least twice, and was repeatedly detained for underage drinking. Each incident pushed her further from her mother. According to sources, Heather had an explosive, uncontrollable temperament. Police records documented 86 calls to their home, a number that speaks for itself. Sheila's sister Debbie recalled that the violent episodes were terrifying. Heather would bite, hit, shove, and completely lose control. Once, she pushed her mother so hard that Sheila fell and broke her arm. And yet, every single time Sheila was asked if she wanted to press charges against her daughter, she refused. Sheila had already lost her husband, and she couldn't bear the idea of losing her daughter too, even legally, even emotionally. Heather's version of the story was that the close bond between her and her father had driven her mother crazy. She claimed Sheila was jealous of their relationship. Heather described her mother as an alcoholic, a drug addict, someone with multiple personality disorder. But no one close to Sheila ever confirmed those allegations. To many, they didn't sound like facts, they sounded more like an attempt to explain, or even justify, a deep and long-standing fracture within this family. In one of her most exhausted emails to a friend, Sheila wrote, "Today, Heather was aggressive and left the house. I'm honestly terrified, and I can't stop worrying about her. After today's visit to the psychiatric facility, it became even clearer to me that something is deeply wrong, that she's very, very sick." When you live the way I've lived with Heather for so many years, these kinds of problems start to feel almost normal, like this is just your everyday way of life. She added that the intake team wanted to admit Heather to a psychiatric hospital immediately, but she knew Heather would never agree to it. Sheila ended the email with these words, "I'm truly scared of what she might do next." At one of the many parties she was attending, Heather, now 18 years old, met an aspiring rapper named Tommy Schaefer. He was 21. That meeting escalated fast, turning into a tight, almost obsessive relationship. They spent nearly all their time together, stayed glued to each other, and acted like the rest of the world had basically stopped existing. From that point on, Heather and Tommy were inseparable. Sheila was absolutely not happy about it. She saw Tommy as a bad influence on her daughter, who was already a troubled, emotionally unstable teenager. And honestly, that's what Sheila feared most, even more chaos. She couldn't stand Tommy's attitude, his aggression, his total disregard for rules, and Tommy, on his end, openly hated her. He didn't hide his contempt. There was no respect there. None at all. Not long before his death, James made changes to his will. Under the updated documents, Heather was set to inherit an enormous fortune, roughly $11 million in assets, and another $1.5 million held in a trust. But there was one critical condition. That money would only go to Heather if Sheila was no longer in the picture. That detail changed everything. In Heather's and Tommy's minds, there was now only one person standing between them, their future together and the money. Their conversations grew darker, more violent. They fed off each other's ideas, fantasized, and even started calling themselves Bonnie and Clyde, romanticizing their connection, slowly blurring the line between reality and some twisted story where it was the two of them against the world. Despite all of this, Sheila didn't give up. She continued to show her daughter love, steady financial support, and opportunities most people could only dream of. Luxury trips, expensive clothes, cars, Heather lacked nothing materially. Sheila tried to balance the tension with care and generosity, believing it might help preserve their bond. And this is where we circle back to where the story began, the island of Bali. Sheila decided to go there with Heather to clear her head, escape the constant pressure, and spend real quality time with her daughter. Bali felt like the perfect choice. 10 days at a 5-star resort, an exotic island, and a complete change of scenery in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. On August 2nd, they flew out in business class. In the photos from the plane, they look happy, relaxed, smiling. The pictures from Bali look just as perfect. They appear content, hugging, having dinners together, walking around the resort, going on excursions. From the outside, everything looks calm, almost idyllic. Looking at those photos, you'd never think anything was wrong. But hotel staff and other guests saw something very different. They noticed the growing tension, public arguments, raised voices, and shouting coming from the room. The atmosphere kept getting heavier. And through all of this, Sheila had no idea that Tommy had already flown out to join Heather. By that point, Sheila's life was already in real danger. One day after Sheila's body was discovered, 18-year-old Heather Mack and 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer were tracked down at a nearby motel. They didn't even try very hard to hide. The couple had checked in using their real names and Sheila's credit card, so it only took a few hours to find them. Just before 8 in the morning, a police officer posing as a cleaner knocked on the door of room 1701. When Tommy, groggy, clearly hungover, opened the door, officers rushed in and cuffed them both. The couple told investigators that Sheila had supposedly been attacked by masked robbers who somehow managed to escape. But in a packed five-star resort with keycard access, round-the-clock security, and extensive surveillance cameras, proving that story was false was almost effortless. The fabricated version collapsed almost instantly, leaving only cold facts and questions with no excuses left to hide behind.
19-year-old woman, Mentel.
Both of them were charged in connection with Sheila's death. After their arrest and the start of the official investigation, detectives zoomed in on every small detail, step by step reconstructing the timeline of what had happened. They analyzed movements, phone calls, text messages, and behavior, basically everything, trying to piece together a clear, complete picture of what really unfolded. And that careful reconstruction made one thing clear. This tragedy wasn't sudden, and it definitely wasn't accidental. The messages recovered during the investigation became a key part of the case. They showed that violent thoughts toward Sheila had surfaced long before the trip ever happened, long before Bali, and long before that fatal night. In those exchanges, investigators could see an evolution of ideas, starting with emotional outbursts and dark fantasies, slowly shifting into more specific and deliberate language. The messages made it clear this wasn't some impulsive thought. The idea of violence had been taking root over time. In one of those messages, sent to a cousin roughly 6 months before the murder, there was already a dangerous tension hanging in the air. Even without describing any direct action, the tone alone hinted at what was eventually coming. For investigators, that message became another confirmation that what happened at the resort wasn't an isolated emotional explosion. It was the final stage of a much longer, deeply disturbing process, one that had been unfolding quietly long before everything came to a deadly end. Tommy wrote, "So, that bitch Heather is seriously crazy. She asked me to do something really wild. She asked me to find someone who would kill her mom for $50,000. Just a few days before the trip, he was already writing about possible ways to do it, saying she could be drowned or suffocated with a pillow." While in Bali, at 10:30 in the evening, Sheila sent an email to her friend Elliot. She wrote,
"I'm waiting for a car that's supposed to pick us up. Heather ran off a few hours ago and I can't find her anywhere. I just found out that 4 days ago she went to a local clinic and fraudulently signed my name and my room number to get prescription painkillers. It looks like she managed to get a pretty large supply. I'm more scared than I've ever been."
The next day, after 9 turbulent nights in Bali, Tommy was already at the resort. He flew in on a flight that cost $12,000, a luxury trip that sharply contrasted with what was really unfolding behind the scenes. He checked into an expensive room several floors above Sheila's. Every single expense was charged to a credit card Heather had previously stolen from her mother. During the long flight, Tommy drank heavily in the business class cabin, like he was celebrating his own arrival, numbing reality with alcohol as the hours passed. As soon as he arrived at the resort, he messaged Heather. From that moment on, their connection became almost constant. Over the next few hours, they met on the beach, drifted apart, then found each other again over and over, always circling back to messages and whispered plans. The texting never stopped. Tommy kept drinking, emptying the hotel minibar glass by glass, sinking deeper and deeper into the night. Time slipped by unnoticed. It was already very late, just before 2 in the morning. Sheila was in her room, unaware of where her daughter was or what was happening around her. Meanwhile, the young couple kept moving through the hotel, appearing and disappearing in different areas, like they were deliberately avoiding any sense of control or stability. They separated briefly, each going their own way, but it didn't last long. At 3:15 in the morning, they met again, and shortly after that, Sheila went out looking for Heather. She rushed down to the front desk, her sharp, frantic movements showing pure panic. In the brightly lit lobby, she practically ran straight into Heather, grabbed her by the arm, and without hesitation pulled her back toward the room. Inside the room, as Sheila tried to understand what was going on, Tommy and Heather were actively texting each other. Message after message came through. They were coordinating, working out some kind of plan, communicating from just a few floors apart. It was a tense back and forth happening in real time, running parallel to what was unfolding inside the room. In those messages, they pushed each other on, fueled their fantasies, talked about how rich they were going to be once they got the money. Alcohol, the darkness, and that feeling of total freedom blurred the line between reality and delusion. It appears that, at least at first, the plan involved Heather taking the primary role in the killing, not Tommy. The idea wasn't fully formed yet, but the logic was already there, quietly lining up the steps that would later lead to fatal consequences. Tommy wrote, "Do whatever you can. Like, can you hit her over the head with some big freaking stick or something?" Heather replied that she could make it look like her mom was drunk and had just fallen. Heather replied, "I can make it look like she was drunk and just fell." That's exactly what she typed. "I also know exactly what I control. I know how people react. That witch. I know what she reacts to. I've spent so much time with her. I know her habits, how she acts, what she does at certain times. This is like a prison escape. You need years of observation. I've been watching her routine. And I know what I control. I'm clever, I'm smart, and I watch everything. Trust Bonnie. Don't repeat other people's mistakes, and don't underestimate me." Tommy found a heavy glass fruit bowl with a metal handle, a bulky, awkward object that instantly looked like a weapon. He told Heather to find a similar vase in the room and hit her mother with it. Heather said she couldn't do it herself. She told him she just couldn't raise her hand, and according to the case files, that's why he had to come to the room personally. Tommy hid the vase under his shirt, trying to mask its shape, and headed downstairs without drawing attention. At that moment, Sheila was lying in bed, slowly drifting off to sleep, completely unaware of the danger closing in. When Tommy quietly entered the room, everything was silent. At the critical moment, Heather covered Sheila's mouth so she couldn't scream, and Tommy began striking her on the head. Investigators determined there were 12 blows, rhythmic, brutal, intentional. After that, they wrapped the body in bed sheets, trying to conceal the evidence, and forced it into a small suitcase. There wasn't enough space, and to get the suitcase closed, Heather sat on top of it, pressing down with her full weight. That was the point of no return. There was no going back after that. Less than an hour later, the couple was already at the front desk, rolling the suitcase behind them like it was just ordinary luggage. Outside the resort, a taxi driver waited for passengers, and Heather and Tommy saw their chance to walk away clean. Surveillance cameras captured them calmly loading the suitcase into the car, then simply walking off without looking back. And as if the case wasn't already disturbing enough, authorities soon learned a new critical detail. Heather was pregnant with Tommy's child. That revelation instantly shifted the tone of the investigation and how the case was perceived. The trial took place in Indonesia, but almost immediately it sparked media attention around the world. Cameras showed Heather several months pregnant sitting beside a tense, emotional Tommy as court proceedings began. If convicted, they could have faced the death penalty execution by firing squad since Indonesia allows its harshest punishments. These cases are decided without a jury. Verdicts are issued by a panel of judges, and the judges focused heavily on what the pair did after the murder, as well as how Heather and Tommy worked together to conceal the crime. There was no direct proof that they boarded the planes with a fully formed, detailed plan to kill Sheila. At the same time, prosecutors argued that the large volume of earlier messages strongly suggested otherwise, pointing to a long-running discussion of the idea. The court rejected claims of a sudden, uncontrollable outburst of violence or self-defense. Tommy's arrival fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the room, and once the violence began, every decision afterward was deliberate. Tommy openly admitted that he was the one who killed Sheila, though at times he tried to frame his actions as forced or defensive. Heather's position was far more complicated and deeply contradictory. At times, she acknowledged involvement. At other moments, she denied everything. Formally, she never entered a full confession. She abandoned the original story about masked robbers and instead claimed she hid in the bathroom while Tommy attacked her mother. According to her, Tommy wanted the money, and she was afraid of him. That fear, she said, was the reason she helped cover up the crime. The trial was briefly paused when Heather gave birth to a daughter, Stella, a short pause in a long, exhausting legal process. In the end, the couple avoided the death penalty. But escaping responsibility was never an option.
They thought he was gonna run!
But they were found guilty.
On the resort island of Bali, an Indonesian court found an American couple guilty in the premeditated murder of the woman's mother. The pair from Chicago were sentenced to lengthy prison terms.
The court ultimately found Tommy guilty of intentional murder, placing full responsibility on him for taking Sheila's life. Heather, for her part, was convicted of aiding and abetting the murder, a decision that reflected her involvement both before and after the crime. The wording of the verdicts was clear and definitive, with no room for double meanings or alternative interpretations. Heather was sentenced to 10 years in prison. For her, it wasn't just the loss of freedom. It was the end of any illusion that this story could somehow be explained away or justified with words. Tommy received a much harsher sentence, 18 years behind bars, a term that firmly underscored the gravity of what he had done and the finality of the court's decision. After sentencing, Heather was transferred to Karabokan Prison, a facility with a notoriously brutal reputation, long associated with harsh and unforgiving conditions. That reality stood in stark contrast to the image of imprisonment she would later present on social media. Her placement there was a blunt reminder that beyond public statements and cameras, there exists a far darker, far more severe reality of punishment.
Jalan in the jail. I want to go to the beach today. Let's go to the beach.
Inside the prison, she had access to social media, and she used it actively. She regularly posted videos where she looked almost carefree, smoking, dancing, walking around the grounds, laughing, eating McDonald's like it was just a normal part of everyday life, not a glimpse into prison routine. In those clips, there was no real sense of isolation or restriction. If anything, everything looked calm, almost ordinary. Her behavior completely clashed with what people expect prison to look like. The videos created this illusion of freedom, ease, and control over her own life. From the outside, it felt like a life without bars, without fear, without consequences, as if the reality of incarceration just disappeared behind a smartphone screen. That's why so many people struggled to believe she was actually in prison. The footage she shared looked more like casual social media posts than the diary of a convicted inmate. And that sharp disconnect between the gravity of the crime and the image she presented to the world only deepened the unsettling sense that none of this felt real at all.
You're losing your hair. No, that's not.
You want to bring Stella go home?
No, it's the cow.
You see, is it Stella's losing her hair. Seriously.
Why?
Maybe it's the food. Maybe it's the Coke. All the Indonesians think I'm crazy for drinking Coke. Maybe they're onto something. Coca-Cola. She's already upstairs. It's gonna be all over the news. Now I'm never gonna get out of jail. Oh boy, that's not even there. No news. What case are you guys here for?
For the next 2 years, Stella remained in prison with Heather, regularly appearing in the videos Heather recorded for the outside world. The camera often captured the child nearby silent, but always there, a constant witness to prison life. Heather took almost every opportunity to speak with the media, willingly giving interviews and returning to that night again and again, subtly shifting emphasis and details each time. It was during one of those interviews that Heather presented a new version of events. According to her, her mother suddenly turned against her after learning about the pregnancy. Heather claimed the atmosphere in the room changed instantly, that Sheila lost control, began running around, screaming, panicking, and searching for a knife. She described the moment as chaotic and dangerous, filled with fear and shouting. Frightened, Heather said she called Tommy for help. By the time he entered the room, she claimed, everything was already out of control. In this version, Sheila allegedly grabbed Tommy by the neck and started choking him. Heather portrayed what followed as instinctive Tommy, acting in self-defense, began striking Sheila with the vase that happened to be within reach. She framed it as a sudden, impulsive act, not something planned in advance. According to Heather, once Sheila was dead, she couldn't bring herself to step away from the body. She said she hugged her mother, held on to her, and refused to leave, almost like she was trying to deny what had just happened. The room, as she described it, was filled with shock and silence. It was then, she claimed, that Tommy asked what they should do next, and that was the moment Heather said they needed to put the body into a suitcase and take it with them. She explained it in a way that was both simple and deeply unsettling. She said she didn't want to leave her mother alone. Even after death, even in those circumstances, she claimed she couldn't accept the idea of just walking away and leaving her behind.
I have absolutely no idea where Heather Mack was at that moment, she said.
She also insisted that despite all the conversations with Tommy about killing her mother, she never viewed those words as an actual plan. In her version, it was all just fantasy emotional blow-ups, extreme statements said in the heat of the moment, things she truly believed would never become rejected that narrative. Those closest to her said the idea that Sheila grabbed a knife, threatened Heather, and attacked Tommy was absurd and totally out of character. They described Sheila as someone who was not violent at all, and they couldn't imagine any situation where she would behave with that level of aggression. To them, this version didn't feel like the truth, it felt like an attempt to justify what had already happened. Sheila's brothers and sisters also pointed out another crucial detail. According to them, Sheila already knew about Heather's pregnancy before they ever flew to Bali. That fact, in their view, seriously weakened the defense's arguments and cast doubt on the motives Heather later described. If Sheila already knew, the image of her suddenly flying into uncontrollable rage just didn't make sense. Later on, Heather gave yet another interview, one that sharply changed how her earlier statements were perceived. In it, she claimed that she was the one who killed her mother and then instructed Tommy to help her cover it up. That statement directly contradicted what she had said before, and only deepened the sense of chaos and inconsistency surrounding the case, leaving even more questions without clear answers.
I don't regret killing my mother, and as evil as that may sound, that's my reality. In my heart, in my mind, my soul, in my blood, in the oxygen running through my body, that I wanted to kill my mother. When I was 10, my mother killed my father in a hotel in Athens, Greece.
We spoke to family friend Elliot Jacobson, who says Heather's claims are nonsense.
It's the kind of statement that doesn't even warrant a response. It's such an absurdity.
He showed me this death certificate for Heather's father, James Mack. It gives the cause of death as pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in the lungs.
Why do you think she's lying about this?
Heather was never easy to figure out. I just think she's unhinged. I also think in this video that she's under some kind of opiate, heroin or cocaine.
I regret trapping an innocent person into this because it was my battle. It's my mother. It was my father.
Tommy, unlike the other people involved in this case, showed nothing but remorse while in prison, real heavy guilt. From the very first interrogations and all the way through, he never denied his involvement. He admitted his role, openly accepted responsibility, and kept saying he understood exactly what he had done. He said the guilt never left him for a single day. And, he was very clear if he could turn back time, he would do everything differently. What's more, Tommy knowingly refused the possibility of early release. He said he didn't believe he deserved a reduced sentence and that he needed to serve every year of the punishment in full. For him, this wasn't about legal technicalities. It was about responsibility, about carrying a punishment that, in his mind, matched the crime. At the same time, Tommy insisted that Heather was the primary manipulator in this entire story. He claimed that without her influence, pressure, and constant encouragement, he never would have ended up in those circumstances or made the choices that ultimately put him behind bars. In his words, you can hear an attempt to explain how it happened not to escape responsibility, but to underline Heather's role as decisive. Tommy's mother later filed an official petition with a court in Chicago, asking to be appointed as Stella's legal guardian. For her, this wasn't just a legal move. It was an attempt to save the child from growing up behind prison walls. Tommy supported that request and firmly stated that Stella should live with his mother in a stable environment far away from the prison system. Heather, however, strongly opposed it. She demanded that her daughter remain with her inside prison. Because of this fundamental conflict, the two sides could not reach any kind of compromise. After reviewing the circumstances and the arguments from both sides, the judge said there was no other option and denied Tommy's mother guardianship. As a result, the court ruled that Stella would stay with Heather in prison until she turned 2 years old. After that, she would be transferred into the foster care system in Bali, another formal but deeply heavy step in the life of a child who, from her very first days, had already been pulled into the consequences of an adult crime. Robert Bibbs, Tommy's cousin, played a significant role behind the scenes of this case. He was the one exchanging messages with Tommy about Sheila's murder, discussing details and the logic of how it could happen. Eventually, Bibbs admitted guilt for assisting in the planning of the crime and agreed to cooperate with investigators as part of a plea deal. According to court records, his motivation was clear and painfully blunt. He expected to receive $66,000 from Heather's inheritance. The court found him guilty, and as a result, Robert Bibbs was sentenced to 9 years in prison, becoming yet another convicted figure in a chain of tightly connected decisions that all led back to the same crime. After 7 years behind bars, Heather was released early for good behavior. To her, it felt like a rare chance to start over a clean slate. She reunited with her daughter and publicly said she wanted to stay in Bali, build a new life there, and finally put some distance between herself and a past that just wouldn't stop following her. But those plans fell apart fast. Her status as a convicted felon made staying on the island legally impossible. Despite all the talk about a fresh start, she was quickly deported back to the United States. It was a formal, cold decision, with no room for compromise, another reminder that the consequences of this case were still shaping her life, even beyond prison walls.
Morning. Heather Mack is scheduled to land here at O'Hare around 9:30 this morning, and while her legal troubles overseas may be over, they may be just beginning here in the States.
Brian Claypool has been Mack's U.S.-based attorney for the past 5 years. The Tribune is reporting Mack was ordered to return to Chicago instead of her planned destination of L.A. It is likely she will be met at O'Hare by FBI agents.
We will vigorously fight any attempt by the U.S. government to charge Heather with a crime stemming from her mother's murder.
A former federal prosecutor says it is unlikely Mack will face additional charges in the U.S.
She was convicted by a competent jurisdiction overseas, was sentenced to 10 years, served 7, but her sentence was not too dissimilar, depending on the facts, that might have happened here in the States.
Mack and Schaefer's 6-year-old daughter Stella is also heading back to the States. She had been living with a foster family in Indonesia. Mack's attorney says a guardian will be here for her when she lands, but it's unclear if Mack will ever get full custody of her daughter.
It would all come down to those components of whether or not it's safe for the child to live with someone who is just convicted of murder.
On board the plane, Heather still looked happy, even upbeat. She genuinely believed this flight marked the beginning of a new chapter. In her mind, once she landed, she'd be able to rebuild her life in California with Stella, settle into some kind of routine again, and regain at least a piece of what felt like normalcy. To her, this wasn't a trip toward another cell. It was a path toward starting over. But at that moment, she didn't know the most important thing. Behind her back, without her presence, she had already been formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder. While the plane crossed the ocean, the legal machinery was already in motion. Decisions had been made. And the moment she landed, before she could even process what was happening, federal agents took her into custody. The flight she believed was her doorway to a future ended in arrest. Sudden, final. And it erased every expectation she had in an instant.
This video was taken. Heiress Heather Mack was arrested when she landed at O'Hare Airport in Chicago today. The charge, conspiracy to commit murder in a foreign country and stuffing her mom's body into a suitcase during their vacation on the island paradise. As seen in this DailyMail.com video, Heather was accompanied by her 6-year-old daughter Stella, who was born behind bars.
She will likely be behind bars for at least 6 months until we can try to have the charges thrown out. I get a phone call, hey, federal authorities have gotten involved, the FBI's involved. They're diverting Heather and her child Stella to Chicago.
Heather and her daughter were accompanied on the deportation flight by the foster mom who has been raising Stella. Do you think that Stella is the real victim here?
It is heartbreaking.
Kia Walker is the mother of Heather Mack's boyfriend, Tommy Schaefer, who's serving 18 years for the slaying in Bali.
I want custody of my granddaughter. Stella has family here. She has me.
Australian journalist Andrea Dixon spent a significant amount of time with Heather, speaking with her directly and observing her behavior outside the structure of formal interrogations. She was there during difficult, tense moments and even flew with Heather back to the United States after her deportation from Bali, witnessing that shift from one reality to another in real time. That level of close access allowed Dixon to see the situation not just as a reporter, but as a person hearing the story without cameras, headlines, or public pressure. And while Andrea is convinced that the sentence itself was fair and justified, she also believes the public misunderstood how the killing actually happened. In her view, the simplified, one-sided version most people accepted doesn't fully reflect the real dynamics between everyone involved in the tragedy. Dixon has repeatedly said that Heather initiated the situation, that she helped create the conditions that allowed everything to unfold. But, as she emphasizes, he was the one who carried out the act itself. Andrea has pointed out that Heather's role is often portrayed as dominant and decisive, when in reality, the situation was far more complicated and conflicted. According to Dixon, he pressured Heather, pushed her psychologically, and kept insisting on the idea of killing. At the same time, Heather repeatedly told him she couldn't do it, that she wasn't capable of taking that step. That internal struggle, the hesitation, the resistance, all of that was largely overlooked. But in Andrea Dixon's view, those details are critical if you want to understand what truly happened. He said, "Go hit her. Do it. Just do it." At the same time, Tommy simply went in and killed for money.
He's not a complex person. He killed for money.
Prosecutors want Heather Mack to serve almost 30 years in prison.
In U.S. federal court, Heather said,
"I've already spent almost 10 years in prison. I felt like I had paid my debt, so I was fully prepared to fight this in court. But now, after sitting here for so long, I understand what I have to do. I'm going to be a convicted felon in America, and that's okay. I get it from the U.S. government's perspective. If I didn't plead guilty and they didn't charge me, I wouldn't be a felon. I could become a police officer, I could work for the state, I could walk down the street carrying a firearm."
Her attorneys argued that Sheila had been an abusive mother, and they were pushing hard for a much lighter sentence than what prosecutors were demanding, which was 28 years.
9 years after police say she helped kill her mother at a resort in Indonesia, Heather Mack has pleaded guilty to charges related to her mother's death.
She went before a judge earlier this morning to avoid going to trial. CBS 2's Lauren Victory was in the courtroom and is following the case.
Heather Mack faced life in prison. 28 years is the max she'll serve, according to this plea deal. The judge now needs to decide if he accepts those terms. And if he decides Mack needs to be behind bars for more than 28 years, Mack can withdraw her plea and go to trial.
She's certainly not the same person she was. She's much more mature. She's much more empathetic. She's grown as a human just like we all would do over the course of 10 years. We're all very different people from 18 to 28.
We are hopeful for a sentence that more appropriately reflects the heinous and premeditated nature of the crime.
That was Sheila von Wiese' brother speaking. The family says they are relieved that she pled guilty.
In the end, 27-year-old Heather pleaded guilty to conspiracy to murder a United States citizen abroad.
Justice almost a decade in the making. Heather Mack has been sentenced to almost 26 years in prison.
She was sentenced to an additional 26 years, a term that effectively guarantees she will spend most of her adult life behind bars. Heather said,
"I can't take back what I did. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, and now I finally understand the love my mother had for me."
Heather Mack said tearfully, the worst punishment she's had to endure is living every day with what she's done. She apologized to her family members and said if she could take away all of this, she would.
That's the first time I've ever heard Heather apologize, and I did appreciate that.
Heather Mack's family referring to the statement she made in court, tearfully apologizing to them. Mack said in part, becoming a mother herself helped her understand her own mother.
Heather says she cries a lot now, and that she constantly feels a deep ache for Sheila and for her daughter. According to her, those thoughts almost never leave her, especially in the silence of her cell. She's now being held in conditions that are completely different from before. Not the kind of place where you can move around freely, go outside, smoke, or keep even the illusion of control over everyday life. She's even said that her previous prison felt more like a rehabilitation center than a real jail. The rules were softer, the restrictions easier to live with. Now, everything is different. The cell is much smaller. There's no direct sunlight. Day and night blur together. The space presses in psychologically, and the routine is stricter and unforgiving. Rules are tighter, supervision is constant, and any mistake carries far more serious consequences than before. In conditions like these, even small things can lead to punishment, and that sense of being trapped only grows stronger. It's a stark contrast to her first experience of incarceration, so extreme that the two periods of her life feel like completely different realities, with almost nothing in common. As of 2026, Tommy remains in Bali, 2033 at the earliest. Time moves slowly for him, and freedom still feels distant and uncertain. At the same time, both he and Heather now face charges in the United States, opening a new legal chapter and adding another layer of pressure. So this story isn't over yet. The consequences are still unfolding. That's what lies ahead. For now, Stella lives with one of Heather's cousins in Colorado, trying to grow up in conditions far removed from the ones that defined the beginning of her life. She was literally born in prison, losing, in a way, her parents and her grandmother before she was even old enough to understand what was happening around her. Her earliest days weren't shaped by freedom or safety, but by cold walls and restrictions. And at this point, all anyone can really hope is that her future will be as balanced as possible, filled with the love, care, and stability she was so badly denied from the very start.